So, we've been talking about we dealt with Demas and the temptation there. Then we went to the river of God and we saw the blessing that it was. And then we went to Bypath Meadow. And we put the river of God and Bypath Meadow together for a reason, because those two are supposed to be not opposites, but they're used in connection. Here's this wonderful time of restoration, of strengthening, and everything else, and then there's the flip side where that breeds the sinful desire to make that temporary rest stop a permanent rest stop, right? And so they get off the path because they desired a better way, and that was kind of a damning statement, right? Of I wanted a better way. Well, who makes the path? Well, God makes the path, but I really want a better way. So God, let me explain to you what the path should look like and what it should feel like and how the direction it should go. So they went off onto Bypath Meadow, if you remember. We talked about the fence, we talked about the style, we talked about going up and over the fence. The quote from Robert Frost, never take down a fence before you know why it was first put up. And they decided to scale it anyway and keep going on the path, and they thought they could always jump over to the path. They could always jump over. As soon as it got bad, they would jump over, and that went downhill, right, pretty literally. And they end up in a river plain, and then their leader falls into a pit, and then the storm starts to come, and it's raining, and the floodwaters are rising, and they're in trouble, and they're stuck, right? And they repent, but the repenting didn't actually solve their present condition. And there's a lesson in there, right? Forgiveness does not necessarily mean forgiveness from consequences. Those two are two different things. Now, God creates all things under His banner, and He will control how things always roll out. So it's not to say that it's out of His control, but there are certain things where He forgives you of your sin, but He doesn't necessarily forgive you of the consequences of your sin. And in this case, forgive you is a bad word. He forgives you of your sin, but He doesn't necessarily change the consequences of your sin. And so these two are still stuck. It's still storming. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. And so they finally give up under this tree. Is this sounding all familiar? Right? And they finally give up. And now in the morning, they find themselves in front of giant despair. Now, so what things kind of stand out about this situation? Let's just kind of review real quick and make sure we get into the presence of mind of our pilgrims. What does Bunyan want us to see? Because this is really where the instructive part. This is one of my favorite arcs in the book. What does Bunyan want us to see in the pilgrims? What can we identify with in these two men thus far? From the scenario that we've had in terms of the river of God, Bypath Meadow, stuck under a tree, faced with giant despair.
And we should enjoy the rest that God gives us, but we shouldn't try to control our path,
right?
Direction.
Yeah. You should enjoy the trials, you should enjoy the rest that God gives you, but not complain when trials come, because they are of His choosing. And they're as necessary and brilliant as that rest that you just got, right? What else? Whose fault was it that they got off the path? Yeah, it was Christians specifically, although what did Hopeful do to stop it? Not much. Oh, well, but are you sure? Yeah. Are you sure? Yeah, okay, well, you're the older one, so I guess, okay. Does youth ever excuse ignorance? No, it makes it understandable, but it doesn't excuse it. I mean, Hopeful knew that the one rule of the path is to stay on the path. And just because a wise Christian tells you to go off the path doesn't change the rules. It just means that the older Christian's actually making a mistake. So Hopeful gets off the path. They both go together. They find vain confidence, remember, and they didn't ask him his name. They just said, hey, this guy, where are you going? I'm going to Celestial City. Hey, we are too. Let's all walk together happily. Right? Until vain confidence disappears. Okay? What else? Once they repented, what happened? Do you remember what kind of that scene? They sat there saying, you're right, brother. Will you forgive me? I forgive you. We should go back. Let me go first. No, you're not ready to go first. You're kind of nervous. Let me go first. No, brother, it got to be me, because if something happens, I would rather sacrifice myself. No, I can't be you, because you're not in the state of mind. So what's happening while they're going back and forth?
well, hopeful, forgave Christian, but there's still the matter of earning back the trust.
Right. Forgiveness does not necessarily equal trust. And that's a big deal. Just because somebody stands and repents, to forgive them is one thing. Now to restore them to full trustworthy status, to know that they're never going to do it again, to say that, all these kind of things that you didn't violate my trust, that's two different things. And we saw that. And that's okay. That's acceptable. That's consequences. Okay? What else? So as they argue together, what's happening around them? The storm is getting worse. The floodwaters are rising. So what's happening to these two as they argue? They're wasting time. It's getting worse. They're stuck. And what are they doing? Even though they're forgiving each other, even though they're talking about getting back to the path, even though they realize what they want to do and that they're far away from the Lord, what's the problem?
They're not moving.
They're not moving. Instead, what are they doing? Because they're doing something. They're active. What are they doing? Arguing. They're talking about who's got the better path. They're talking about how we got here in the first place. They're talking about which direction we really should go. And who's going to decide what direction we're really going to go. So what are they doing to each other? Talking to each other. They're just staring at their navels. They're just sitting there talking about what you think and what I think and who's going to do this. Maybe we should try that. And then they start running. Let's go this direction. And finally God gives them this kick with this word from Jeremiah that says, get moving, get back to the path. All right, let's start moving. And so they start running, right? And what do we never see them do? They don't pray. What else?
Consideration of God's will. It's always their effort.
Right.
Running in the book never seems to be that much of a good thing.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of times running is not a good thing, but running aimlessly is even worse, right? So here's the problem. They never look at their Bibles. They never look down at their robes to remember the righteousness of Christ. They never... Scott, did you... Oh. So they're always stuck with, what am I going to do now? And it kind of makes sense. And this is hopefully what you can identify with. What got them off the path in the first place? Well, their own choices, their own wisdom, what made sense to them, what they thought would be good, that got them off the path. So therefore, what's going to get them back on the path? Their own choices. I got to fight my way back, right? I got to pick myself up by the bootstraps. I got to put myself back to where I was supposed to be. I screwed up, so therefore I should fix it. Yep, I got to fix it. I got to fix it. How many times have we said that? I have to fix it. I blew it, God. I totally repent. I know. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, God, I'm going to get back in the Bible. I am going to set this goal where I'm going to have this many days in the Word. And there's nothing wrong with that. And certainly the effort is good. But what are you doing? You're trying to fix it. You're trying to fix it. I'm trying to put myself back. What's the center of the historical idea of penance? That I will exact the amount of forgiveness necessary that I've committed. So what do I have to do? I have to give X amount of money to the St. Peter's Basilica? Okay. Mr. Pope, if that's what you say I have to do, I'll do it. Right? I have to climb on my knees up 100 stairs towards whatever cathedral? Okay, I'll do that, because that's going to be me fixing this problem. It's going to be me recognizing the problem, which isn't bad, but me fixing the problem by beating myself in the back with or spiritual flogging. That's our biggest thing, right? How bad of a sinner am I? I'm such a worm. I'm a terrible sinner. Nobody's a worse sinner than me. How many of us have done that? And what it becomes is just you trying to fix the problem. It's you trying to tell yourself and tell God how bad you really are. Guess what? He already knows. He knows more than you do how bad you really are. Right? So when they're struggling to get back, what they're really doing is trying to fix everything on their own. And what is necessary for restoration? Coming to God. Their only answer of how to get back to the path is to ask God, how do I get back to the path? Right? There's nothing wrong with effort. They have to get back to the path. They have to figure out how to get from where they are to where they need to be. There's no doubt about that. The question is how. Who's going to direct their steps? Who are they going to allow to lead? What led them off the path was themselves. What they need to get back on the path is not their own lead, it's His lead. Does that make sense? And so they have to get this, and this is what put them off, and this is where they're struggling. And now it's going to dawn on them that the reason they're in this state in the first place is because of the decisions they've made. And now what's keeping them in this place is the decisions they've made. And this is what's key now, and that's the new thing in our story. They're struggling to get back to this path, and now it's dawning on them that what they did is their own fault. And now they've reached the conclusion that the proper judgment for them is to stay where they're at. What's wrong with that statement?
Ignoring God's grace.
It's ignoring God's grace, and it's kind of like the idea that they desired a better path. Because what have they decided now?
They themselves the judge of where they should not go.
Exactly. This is what's proper, God. This is where I belong. This is what I deserve. God, there's nothing better. I shouldn't get anything better. You shouldn't take care of me. You can't forgive me after what I just did. This is what I deserve, right? And so this is where we pick up in our story. Now there was not far from that place, there was Doubting Castle, and there was giant despair. And he came to the Christians. He found them asleep and said, "Where are you from, and what are you doing here?" And they said they were pilgrims and had lost their way. So they admitted that they were wrong. Then said the giant, "You have this night trespassed on me by trampling in and lying on my grounds. Therefore, you must go along with me." So they were forced to go because he was stronger than they. They also had little to say, for they knew themselves in a fault. Do you see their situation? They get up and say, "Whatever you say, giant. You're the leader now. I'm on the wrong place. I put myself on your grounds. I'm the one who trespassed, so therefore I have to do what you say. I have to submit to you. There is no greater power than you because you are stronger than me. I exalt you. I put you above me. Therefore, I got no choice. I'm stuck." Do you see why this should, hopefully, you should find yourself identifying with these guys? How many times do we put ourselves in these positions? How many times do we stray from the path? How many times do we make conscious, willing decisions to do stupid, dumb, wrong, sinful things, and we know it, and then God's good enough to be able to show us our error, and we know it, and we accept it, and we don't pretend that it's not a problem, but then what do? Where do we draw the line? You can't forgive me, though, God, of this. You can show me what I did wrong, but you can't forgive me of this because it's just too bad. It's just too bad. I deserve what I'm getting now. I deserve my problems. I deserve to be punished for my sin. But that's not your choice. That's not your decision. Your decision is to follow where He leads. And what are these guys doing? They're allowing despair, the giant despair, to become their master and following where He leads. Do you see the difference between the two? They're willingly submitting to the giant despair, forgetting who actually leads their path the whole rest of the way that they've gone. Okay? That's our tension now. So hopefully you can identify with screwing up, being in the wrong place, and then hopefully you can identify with not forgetting the grace that God gives, forgetting the forgiveness of the gospel, forgetting all the depths of grace that God has for you. If you guys scroll up a little bit, Annie Flint said, "He giveth more grace as our burdens grow greater. He sendeth more strength as our labors increase. To added afflictions he addeth his mercy. To multiplied trials he multiplies peace. When we have exhausted our store of endurance, when our strength has failed ere the day is half done, when we reach the end of our hoarded resources, our Father's full giving is only begun. His love has no limits, His grace has no measure, His power no boundary known unto men. For out of his infinite riches in Jesus he giveth and giveth and giveth again. Okay? But these guys have forgotten that. And we're going to see what happens when you forget that. Michael, Justin?
It kind of reminds me of the man in the cave from earlier.
Yep.
That they know what is right, but the man in the cave, God can't save me. I'm too far from grace.
Right.
God can't forgive me.
Right. If you remember the stories at the very beginning of the book when he was in the house of interpreter, that's photobombing, just FYI. Camera. Sorry. But remember the man in the cage that was in the house of interpreter, and he's showing him all these things. And one of them it's hotly debated. It's difficult to understand. Is a man in the cage, and we talked about that a lot. And I'll tell you what I think makes sense to me, because there's different ideas around it. I mean, it's just Bunyan's picture. But the idea was that this man's stuck in a cage, and he says that I started off as one of you. I was a fair pilgrim. I was making my path, and then I backslid. Basically, I went back to the things that I knew I shouldn't. I started to willingly sin. And now he says, the Christian says, but will he not forgive you? He's interacting with a dream, which is kind of cool virtual reality stuff. But he says, won't he forgive you? And the guy says, I'm too far gone. There is no forgiveness for me. I'm just stuck in this cage. And so one question is Bunyan saying that you can get to the point where God just holds you over, right? Romans 1. He gives you over to your sin. That's possible. But I think the fact is he's in this cage, not because God's forgotten him or ignores him. If you read the encounter, there's nothing of the gospel in it. The man's forgotten the gospel. He never looks up. He never addresses God. He says, here's my condition. Here's how I see my condition. Here's how I see myself. And so Michael's right to the point that these guys have that same condition right now. And this is actually one of the counterpoints to that story, if you want to look at it that way. What's going to happen to them? Are they getting stuck in this little cage? Are they stuck without any hope? Have they decided that they are going to pass judgment on themselves? And more importantly, will God truly give up on them and allow them to pass this judgment upon themselves? Does that make sense? Okay.
Is there any other place in the book where it shows a picture of the opposite?
The opposite being?
Where they do turn and look to God in the midst of the consequences of their own sin.
We'll see. There's the tension.
I mean, because I can sit here and think, I've been there so much. What help me see?
Sure, there's a ton. And that's what they're forgetting, right? When Christian was battling Apollyon, he was dead on his back, and Apollyon was about to make his final blow, and then he gets caught monologuing, right? And Christian reaches out and finds a sword right there, right next to him. And it was God's power that led him through that. When he was at the end of himself in the valley of the shadow of death, and he had just to look forward, and he called out and said, I don't know what to do, and then all of a sudden there's a voice that comes and encourages him the rest of the way. Vanity Fair, they find the strength by just being who they are, and then he sends hopeful to them to keep going. And then we're going to see it here. We'll see it at the very end as he crosses over. He'll have to get help. So, you'll see there's actually lots of that in here, that just when the Christians think that they're at the end of themselves, God gives them exactly what they need when they need it. And that's what they've forgotten here. That's the problem. Okay? All right. So they also had but little to say, for they knew themselves a fault. The giant, therefore, drove them before him and put them into his castle, into a very dark dungeon, nasty and stinking to the spirits of these two men. This is kind of interesting. They are nasty and stinking to the spirits of these two men. So it was dark, it was dingy, it was unpleasant, it was they were put in chains and stocks. It's a bad place to be, right? They forgot. Okay, let's move on. Here then they lay from Wednesday morning till Saturday night without one bit of bread or drop of drink or light or any to ask how they did. Now that's kind of an overarching, so if you look at it linearly, you're going to struggle with this. Bunyan, what he just did as a narrative, he's saying, they're in there from Wednesday to Saturday, and now what I'm going to do is tell you what happens between Wednesday and Saturday. Does that make sense? So it's not there from Wednesday to Saturday, and then he's going to tell us the rest of the story. He's saying they were there from Wednesday to Saturday, and in general, if you will, there's not one bit of bread or drop of drink or light or any to ask how they did. Now we're going to see light, so I'm trying to set you up, otherwise you'll be confused if you read it linearly. They were therefore here in evil case, and were far from friends and acquaintance. And now in this place Christian had double sorrow, because it was through his unadvised counsel that they were brought into this distress. So Bunyan himself confesses these things, and see if you can identify with them. These thoughts would make place for themselves in my heart. You have no part nor lot in this Jesus. You have but put him away from you. You have said in your heart, let him go if he will. Now therefore you are severed from him. You have severed yourself from him. Behold then his goodness, but yourself to be no partaker of it. Oh, how this would add to my affliction, to conceit that I should be guilty of such a sin against the Holy Spirit for which he did not die. These thoughts would so confound me and tie me up from faith that I knew not what to do. Okay, so he's realizing the issue. He knows it was his fault, and he can't let that go. He just can't let that go. He knows he blew it, and he knows he blew it bad. Okay, and he knows that he actually took somebody with him. That almost always makes it even worse. When you screw up, it's one thing. When you screw up and cause other people to screw up, man, that's just like a ton of bricks on top of what already crushed you, right? So. Barry Horner says, the terror of this scene is not the confining circumstances so much as a prisoner's belief that they are beyond the reach of grace. They believe that God has deserted them, and so they are stuck in this dungeon, right? In the cartoon Aladdin, not the new one, spoiler, but in the cartoon Aladdin, he's stuck in the dungeon. That's where you meet Jafar, right? That dungeon where he thought he'd never get out, where there's no way of escape. He's just stuck in those chains forever. That was the idea. That was what you were supposed to be doing. Now, Giant Despair had a wife, and her name was Diffidence. All right, so diffidence. What's the opposite of diffidence? Diffidence. That's the key. Confidence. So what's diffidence? If we know what confidence is.
A lack of confidence.
Okay, very good. Using the word in its definition. What's diffidence? It's the lack of confidence, which means uncertainty. What else? Wavering, uncertainty. Good. If confidence is the belief you're going to succeed, then diffidence is the belief that you're going to fail. Okay? So despair is married to diffidence. Make sense? When I think I'm going to screw up, what am I probably going to do? I'm going to screw up. All right, there is a psychological component of this. It's not to say that confidence is the answer to all things, but notice the confidence. There is a lot of confidence in our especially our New Testament. In fact, there's a ton in the Old Testament too. What are we supposed to be confident in? What does Paul boast in? The cross, right? When he says he boasts in the cross, he's not necessarily saying that in our sense of the chest-thumping athlete or something on TV who sits there and talks about, I'm from the Ohio State, which, whatever. There's only one Ohio State. We all know that, right? Besides, Michigan's better. So he thump their chest, because that's their confidence. That's their version of confidence. But it's a weak confidence because it's only as good as they are, right? Paul boasts. He has complete confidence in. He puts all of his eggs in this one basket of the cross. He says, this is who I am. This is everything to me. This is life. This is how I'm going to build my foundation upon. And so there's a confidence that God will cover all of his sins. There's a confidence that God's grace is completed at the cross, that Jesus is on a throne, and that he will make that intercession when the time is right for him when he passes away and stands before God in judgment, that there will be grace to cover, and that his account is clean, that he will be ushered into heaven. He's put all that confidence into the cross. He boasts that the cross is everything to him because he has that much confidence in it. Okay? So these guys are stuck with giant despair and diffidence. They do not believe that there is anything left for them. And diffidence goes along that. When we despair, when we start to doubt our situation, when we doubt ourselves, we're doubting God. And so we have no confidence that anything better is going to happen. That we deserve our lot. We will never get out of this hole that I've dug. Okay? And so for some of us, we keep digging. In this case, the guys just keep finding more problems. So the giant Despair had a wife, her name was Diffidence. So when he had gone to bed, he told his wife what he had done, to wit, that he had taken a couple of prisoners and cast them into his dungeon for trespassing on his grounds. Then he asked her also what he had best to do further to them. So she asked him what they were and whence they came and whither they were bound, and he told her. Then she counseled him that when he arose in the morning, he should beat them without any mercy. All right. So Despair is a giant who represents the fact that you got no hope, despair, right? Diffidence, however, is the one that says, go and beat him. So who's the idea generator in this little factory of depression? Diffidence. Despair is carrying it out. Despair makes everything worse, but it's the diffidence that's going to add the ideas, not the action, the ideas. Diffidence, this lack of confidence, this belief that God has given me up, the fact that I don't have any lot left in the cross, is the thing that's creating all these problems for the pilgrims. And then despair just is the thing that kind of turns them into the situations that they're pulled into. So in this case, diffidence says, here's the thing: go and beat them mercilessly. Despair, go and just hurt them. Just give it everything you got. So when he arose, he getteth them a grievous crab tree cudgel. So a crab tree is we don't have them here. It's not a crab apple tree. It's a little bit different. But the idea is kind of the same. It's basically a whip. It's a very flexible piece of wood that will not break, and it flexes. So it makes a great little whip. And if you're a boy, you love to pick those and use them on your brother's back thighs or something like that when he wasn't looking. But they're going to actually use it for punishment. Okay, so they go and they get a crab tree cudgel and goes down to the dungeon to them, and there first falls into rating of them as if they were dogs. Or we would use the word berating of them. He calls them all sorts of names. He verbally abuses them, tells them how worthless they are, that they're not any good. You're just worthless pilgrims. You're no good to God. You've got no good to anyone else. Everybody hates you. Although they never gave him a word of distaste. Now notice the pilgrims have got themselves back to what they should be acting like. They've repented. They're back to controlling themselves. They've come back to saying, you're right, I am a sinner. But he gives them everything, but they don't respond. They stay silent. Then he falls upon them and beats them fearfully in such sort that they were not able to help themselves or to turn them upon the floor. So they're flat on the ground, and they don't even have the strength at this point to even turn over. And if you're flat on the ground, what are you looking at? Dirt. If they were to turn over, what would they be looking at? They'd be looking up. But they're stuck. They're beaten so mercilessly that they're stuck looking down. Make sense? It's exactly what despair does. It's exactly what depression does. It keeps us looking down. It keeps us with our eyes to the ground, not looking up to heaven, not trusting that there's anything more than what I can see right in front of me. This done, he withdraws and leaves them there to condole their misery and to mourn under their distress. So all that day they spent the time in nothing but sighs and bitter lamentations. So Ken Poole says, despair is a cruel taskmaster. It beats us without mercy. It leaves us helpless with nowhere to turn or no way out. Distrust is its crueler companion. It causes us to waver and question what we know to be true. It isolates us and casts suspicion over our hopes, our joy, and salvation. It compounds our misery and can deceive us even to the point of thinking that life is no longer worth living. Okay? Now, it was tough. They're stuck. Now, the question is, of course, what is Bunyan picturing? You got to remember that this is an allegory. So when we see despair beating them, it's not necessarily saying that when we get depressed, somebody comes in and starts beating us to the point of, beating us to a pulp. What he's picturing is the idea of a spiritual flogging, that we will allow ourselves, we will take ourselves down. Sometimes physically with self-mutilation. We see that with people cutting themselves on things that are really dangerous. But then there's the equally dangerous, at least spiritually, to sit there and flog ourselves to the point of being so depressed we can't lift our eyes up into heaven anymore. We start giving up on the church, we give up on the word, we give up everything else. So this is the idea, if we were to call it in our generation, we would call it clinical depression. These are all signs of depression. These are people that have given up hope and they struggle to see any joy in this world. Does that make sense? This is 400 years before we would have a name for it, but we would call it depression. And so what's Bunyan's view on depression? Well, there's only one answer to true depression: the gospel. Now, are there other things that we found? Yes, there are chemical imbalances, there are struggles, absolutely. But ultimately, the answer for every depressed person, every despairing person, is the gospel. It always is. Now, one thing I want to point out, they were beaten mercilessly until they were dead, right? No. How bad were they beaten? Well, they couldn't turn over, so pretty bad. Are they dead? Nope. Gosh, I wonder why. Okay. The next night, she, diffidence, talking with her husband about them further and understanding that they were yet alive, did advise him to counsel them to make a way themselves. Counsel them. Sorry. She did advise him, she advises despair, to counsel them to make a way themselves. So what is she telling the giant to do? Give them a way out, being suicide. Make an end of yourselves, right? That could be read either give up on your Christianity, spiritual suicide if you want to look at it that way, or just plain out suicide. Kill yourself. Kill yourself. You got no way out of this. It doesn't get any better from here. You're just stuck. You're at the bottom of the barrel and there is no coming out at this point, right? You're past the point of no return. You're at the end of the tracks and here comes a train. We've got all those expressions that we all know. This is where that she's telling, go despair, tell them that the only way out of the situation is to kill themselves. Okay? So when morning was come, he goes to them in a surly manner as before, and perceiving them to be very sore with the stripes that he had given them the day before, he told them that since they were never like to come out of that place, their only way would be forthwith to make an end of themselves, either with a knife, a halter, that's a noose, or poison. For why, ready, listen, for why, said he, should you choose life, seeing it is attended with so much bitterness? So what does he want them to conclude? This is life. Right. And this will never, ever change. Now, what does Romans 12:1 tell us? Does anyone know that verse? Do not be conformed to the standards of this world, but be transformed. What's by the renewing of your mind? So what is transformation? What do you start with and what do you end with? Something different. There is change. What's Ken's two favorite words? I know he always finds a new different word every verse he goes through as he preaches. But now. Because what does but now always indicate? Something's changed. Something has changed. And here's the situation. You will never get any better. It will never change. And here's our Bibles. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. All that matters in Galatians is the new creation. But now, right, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. But now, there's all these but nows. There's all these differences. There's all these changes because you're talking about the God that created something from nothing. Now he's going to take nothing in a sinner and create a work of grace in his cross, in his power. There's always possibilities for change in him. If you look at just this world, you're right, it's never getting any better. You do have every cause for concern and bitterness in this world, but not in God. But that's not what despair wants you to think. Despair wants you to think that you are stuck here and there is no power on this earth that will ever change the situation you're in. And that is just not true. Because God is everywhere and he knows the situation and he has the power to change it just by snapping his fingers if he wanted to. Right? That's an anthropomorphism. I don't know if he has fingers. Okay? But you get the point. So that's what he's trying to convince them. That there is so much bitterness in this world, why should you continue in it? But they desired him to let them go, which is kind of funny, that their answer is, but giant, let us go. We don't want to be here anymore. We don't like it here. I want something better. So our pilgrims, this is important, they're alive. They have a sense of life. They are not totally undetermined. They are not really stuck in these stocks. They want to get out. They want something different. That tells us that they're not totally gone yet. Okay? But who do they ask to let them go?
The wrong guy.
Yeah. Despair is not going to help you out. Right? And with that, he looked ugly upon them, and rushing to them, had doubtless made an end of them himself. But he fell into one of his fits, for he sometimes in sunshiny weather fell into fits, and lost for a time the use of his hand. Therefore he withdrew, and left them as before. All right. So in the first state, he beats them mercilessly and leaves them on the ground. Now he comes in and says, there's no hope for you. You might as well give it up. And then as he's about to rush them and kill them again, what happens to him? He get a little ray of sunshine, comes in, he kind of gets hit by something, and all of a sudden he falls into a seizure and can't control himself, and he has to leave. So now we've had twice that the giant has come upon them, made their lives so miserable, but he can't complete the deed. Interesting. Okay, so let's see what happens to these guys. Then did the prisoners consult between themselves whether it was best to take his counsel or no, and thus they began to discourse. Christian says, brother, what shall we do? That life that we now live is miserable. For my part, I know not whether it is best to live thus or die out of hand. My soul chooseth strangling rather than life, and the grave is more easy for me than this dungeon. Shall we be ruled by the giant? All right, so Christian is seriously considering suicide. Hopeful says, indeed, our present condition is dreadful, and death will be far more welcome to me than thus forever to abide. Now that's important, that Hopeful doesn't just tell him, come on, man, it's not that bad, right? Think there's a bright side, right? Always look on the bright side of life if you're Monty Python. You start to sing the song, right? So Hopeful doesn't do that. Hopeful avoids just simple platitudes. He speaks honestly and openly with Christian and says, you're right, it kind of sucks. It's bad.
It quotes Job, but then all the Job's friends, Hopeful's not doing what Job's friends did to Job. Hopeful is
right.
Empathizing.
Right. Right. And Job's friends try to solve the problem through their own means. Hopeful says, I agree. I agree. And actually, when we did the biblical counseling, one of the things I say about suicide is, don't try to look on the bright side of life with the person you're trying to counsel. Understand that they see things as dreadful and difficult, and for you to tell them the opposite doesn't actually solve their problem. What you need to do is understand where they're at. Help them see things as they are, not necessarily how you want them to be. There's a difference. So Hopeful's verse is honest, and that's important. All right. But yet, let us consider the Lord of the country to which we are going hath said, thou shalt do no murder. No, not to another man's person. Much more than are we forbidden to take his counsel to kill ourselves. Besides, he that kills another can but commit murder upon his own body. For no one can kill himself, but for one to kill himself is to kill body and soul at once. Now, here's kind of the view on suicide that Bunyan's taking. God said, do not murder. That's one of your commandments. Pretty basic. But the idea being, who gives life? God does. And who's allowed to declare the end of days? God does. And so when we go and we decide to end someone's life prematurely, and we're not talking about capital punishment, that is a command given to God, given to man and governments, not individual men, but to the government and the ruling authority. But we're talking about murder. We're talking about you taking upon yourself individually to exact justice in a way that you see fit at the timing that you see best. That's what we're talking about when we talk about murder. It's you taking what God has designed as, here's in my plan, this is when this person will die, and you deciding to move that schedule up based on your own wisdom and your own desires. That's murder in a kind of a different way, right? So that's what we're talking about here. And so how they saw murder as that, and when they looked at suicide is basically the same thing. You're deciding that God's timing and Him keeping you alive is not to your desire, so you decide to end things yourself. I will take that into my own hands. I will be the sovereign over my life. God, you want me to live another 20 years? Well, I decide I don't want to. I'm done. I don't care what your sovereign plan is. I am deciding that I will end this right now. That's how they looked at suicide. Suicide was a form of murder, not because you were killing yourself biologically or secularly, but because you were taking a stand against God. This was an act of rebellion. I don't like the path you've put me on. I don't like the life you've given. I don't like your timing for my life, so therefore I will take it upon myself to solve my problems by myself. That makes sense? And I'm going to take the thing that's most divine in me, if that makes sense. What God breathed into me, I am going to reject. I'm going to push out. Okay? So that's how they viewed suicide.
Like a selfish aspect to it.
Absolutely selfish.
They're desiring what they think is best for them.
Exactly.
God has.
Right. It is completely selfish. It's everything about me and my decisions and my wisdom. And so that's how they saw it. So therefore, that's why Hopeful here says, to kill yourself is to kill both your body and your soul, because by doing that, you are rebelling against God. To kill someone else, you're rebelling too, but to kill yourself is basically to send yourself straight to hell, because you're rebelling against God. You're declaring Him not to be your king, and what are you asking for?
If you think of Saul, David wouldn't kill Saul if he was waiting. And that he placed that in God's hands, and then was it Saul who at the end of his life asked his servant to run him through?
Right.
And he said he wouldn't.
Yeah,
So
he's more righteous than Saul.
He threw himself on the sword to kill himself, didn't he? Isn't that Saul? Yeah.
Was that Saul? Yeah. Right? Yeah, that's some great examples. Right? What happened to Judas? He couldn't live with himself, and so he hung himself because he just couldn't deal with it anymore. Okay? All right. And moreover, my brother, thou talkest of ease in the grave. You think that by dying you're going to have it better than now. But hast thou forgotten the hell whither certain the murderers go? For no murderer shall have eternal life. And let us consider again that all the law is not in the hand of giant despair. Oh, wait a second, Hopeful. You speak strange words to me. What is he saying? Not all the law is in the hand of giant despair. What does that mean? That means that there's somebody above the giant that actually controls the giant. There's somebody else's words that have more power than what the giant says. What is Hopeful being? Hopeful. He's lifting his eyes to look at something other than the walls of this dungeon. Let us consider again, let's see. Others, so far as I understand, have been taken by him as well as we, and yet have escaped out of his hand. Who knows but that God made the world may cause the giant despair to die, or that at some time or other he may forget to lock us in, or he may in a short time have another one of his fits before us and lose the use of his limbs. And if ever that should come to pass, for my part, I am resolved to pluck up the heart of a man and to try my utmost to get from under his hand. I was a fool, and I did not try to do it before. But however, my brother, let us be patient and endure a while. The time may come that may give us a happy release, but let us not be our own murderers. Okay, so you can see where the counsel is. Let's not do this right now. That's a bad idea. And besides, what could happen? Well, he could have another one of his fits. He could forget to lock us in. He might do something, and then we can run out the door while he's not looking or while he's stuck. Okay, so that's great that Hopeful sees that there's a chance of release, right? He sees other people have not been stuck with giant despair. They've overcome this depression. So what are his possible solutions? The giant would fall into a fit. The giant would forget to lock us in. The giant wouldn't be looking while we sneak out the door. What are all those conditions?
So man-centered.
Man-centered and very passive, right? Maybe the giant will make a mistake. maybe something will happen that will allow us to escape. Okay? They're thinking along the right lines. Yes, there is a chance of escape. But right now, all their solutions are that the giant will screw up. Not that they will grab hold, that God will come to their rescue. Do you see the difference? So the minds are changing, but not fast enough.
So how would they say to themselves or talk, this is God's providence?
Where they're at?
That this giant forgot to lock us in.
Right. That somehow the depression just lets up. That somehow it's bright and sunny every day for the rest of my life, and I can always see the birds chirping.
Kind of like by chance versus by God's design.
Right. Does that make sense? Is that what you're asking?
Maybe it's just a little tweak or something.
Uh-huh.
But
What that the giant forgetting might be
God's
the
providence.
instrument that God uses to do that.
Oh, potentially. But right now, that makes sense, what you're saying.
Right.
That it could be God's providence that allows him. Kind of like Christian, that when he was at Vanity Fair, they just left the door open, he was able to get out. Right? That was God's providence to allow him to escape. In this case, though, Hopeful is looking at this as chance, random chance, not necessarily providence. Notice how he's not saying that God will provide a way for us, that God will distract the giant. He's saying that hopefully the giant will screw up somehow.
He's still putting the giant in control.
Right, exactly. It's all passive. I just hope that I can take advantage of the giant screw up. Okay? But with these words, Hopeful at present did moderate the mind of his brother, so they continued together in the dark that day in their sad and doleful condition. So he's got his head up, but it's still dark, and they're still in the dungeon, and they're still sad and doleful. Okay? Now, we are not going to make it through the rest of this in this lesson, so we can stop here, or we can push a little bit further, or we can really just race through the rest of it if you want, unless you want to keep going.
Finish off a few days.
Okay. What do you guys just want to finish it up today? Is this really kind of dull to you and want to
Like
keep
we're on
moving?
the path and discussing back and forth which way we're going to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we pray about it? We could.
Go over the style or not?
Will you be behind if you
No, we got time. So I guess we'll just stop here and keep going, because there's some stuff in here. Christian's going to start again. Christian hasn't given up on suicide. And that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. We're going to have to understand what Christian wants to continue on suicide. And then we're going to see how they get out of this. And it's going to be kind of interesting. And I do want to spend a little bit of time on why and how they get out, even if we might finish a little early next week. But let's do that. Let's go ahead and stop here. Finishing early. Just want to point that out, that we're finishing up a little bit early. And then we'll come back. Or, I think, what's coming up next? Yeah, the next verse really, okay, we're going to stop here because there's more we're going to discuss next week. Because the giant's going to keep doing this, where he keeps coming at him and keeps bringing him this close to dying. And that's it. This close to dying. And that's it. You starting to see the theme?
No. Well, he doesn't have the power to kill him.
Oh, does he? He keeps threatening, though, Bob. Diffidence keeps telling him to do it. And yet something keeps him from finishing it off. And so why is the giant advising them to commit suicide?
Because he can't.
Because he can't do it himself. So maybe if I can convince them to do it, I don't have to. Okay? But we got to talk about bones and graveyards and dungeons. Okay?